Welcome everyone. Got it. Welcome everyone. This is David Brown from StratCan, and with so much talk going on right now about lab results in the Canadian cannabis space, I thought it would be nice to bring together three people who know this subject quite well. And so we're going to dive in today talking not only about Rob O'Brien's results that he posted online recently, but expanding the conversation out to a couple other folks in the cannabis space, in the Canadian cannabis testing space, who really understand what's going on in the industry and have a lot to say as well. So really first, I just want to pass things over to Rob O'Brien, who's going to talk about some of the research he did, I think on 43 different strains that you
46.
purchased,
Yeah.
46 different products that you purchased from the BC Cannabis Store. You then released those results publicly, redacted a bit of information, and then, as I understand, sent the unredacted information to the BC Cannabis Store as well as Health Canada.
That's correct.
So, Rob, I'll just let you introduce yourself a little bit, and then you can explain, first why it is you took this approach and wanted to do this testing, and why you wanted to release it publicly.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Rob O'Brien. I'm the owner and CEO of Supra Research and Development. We're an ISO 17025 accredited testing lab. We also have the ability to make reference materials that we're just getting into. I'm a former university professor who got into the cannabis business a little while ago when I got involved with the processor. We helped set up their all their GMP type stuff. But for this stuff, I was looking at the cannabis industry, and there's been lots of talk and suggestion that there's THC inflation in the cannabis sector and in products on the shelf. This is a big concern to me because it undermines not only the regulatory framework that we have here in Canada, but also a lot of the fingers have been pointed towards the labs. And I know myself that I do work properly, and I know there's a lot of other people who do. So this was a big concern to me. So I did ask Health Canada. I proposed a study to them, and they literally didn't get back to me on this. So I then self-funded the study to see the magnitude of the problem. Or if there wasn't a problem, I think that was an important message to get out as well. Because the perception that there's a problem is a significant issue as well. So what we did is we ended up buying 46 products that were in this study. We bought a few others that we did other type studies at the same time. But of the 46, there was 12 7-gram packages, 14 3.5 gram packages. And with the 1 gram package, I did something interesting as well. I bought 5 from the same brand, same lot number, and I had 4 sets of those. So there was 20 1 gram packages. Those 1 gram packages have lots of interesting information content because it has both the variants associated with the packing of the material, as well as the variants associated with my testing of that material. And in addition to that, for the 3.5 and the 7 gram packages, we also run moisture on it. My method for moisture requires 1 gram of material. And with that, in my testing as well, I use 0.2 grams that I extract to do the potency testing. So I had residual materials for the 3.5 gram and 7 gram packages. So I sent 1 gram aliquots to a couple of other labs that I trusted, and they are currently analyzing those now. They were sent to them blind, and when I get it back, I'll compare it to the ones on my list. But that kind of undermines the idea that it's just the labs can't do the work, right? Because in a way, I'm also putting my company's credibility on the line, because if my results were totally off, I'm having other people check that. But I don't, and some of this work has been interpreted that I'm saying that the labs can't do testing properly. In fact, that couldn't be further from the truth. I think what's happening, and what the data shows, is that it's likely they're only testing per harvest and using that number, which there may be a little bit of a thumb on the scale, we can't tell, to then put all their packages for all the sizes. And I'll talk about some other evidence we have why that's a major problem. But the reality is that for the 1 gram packages, they were over 36% out on average of the 20 samples. For the 3.5 gram ones, they were also 25 to close to 30% out. And of the 7 grams, they were also out as well. But there was a gradual increase as we went from 7 to 3.5 to 1 in terms of how far out. None of the products that I tested were at the label claim. And in a normal product distribution with other statistics, you would expect some high, some low around that. So they seem to be all lower. And in terms of just trying to understand this, we also did a separate study that I put on another post where I took 2 28-gram packages and I simply visually separated those into 4 subsets based on the physical size of the buds. And in this case, the larger buds were quite close to the label claim. One case, it was 1.5% out. The other one was 2.5% out. So this kind of implies that, yeah, maybe this is what's happening, is that they're using their premium buds to get the COAs. They only need 1 COA and they're using it on all the packages. The other thing that came out of this other little side study was that there was about a 25 to 30% difference between the biggest and the smallest buds. And that was kind of consistent with what I'm seeing with the results within a bulb. This is only an N of 2. There's only two groups here. I'd like to reproduce this more, but because I'm funding all of this, there's only so much I can do, right? So not only does it cost me to buy the product, but there is cost to running it for my staff and standards and all of that stuff. So those were consistent with what I found in the whole data set. And the other thing is that Health Canada and BC Cannabis, they have a defined complaint system. And in order to, rather than just say, oh, there's a problem with, and you, Harry, wave your hands a little bit, this was a specific test set that I sent them the identification of the lot numbers, et cetera, but nobody else. I'm not here to call out other companies or even other labs. And when I sent that to them, they need to address that by their own system. And then recently, I also sent it to the Competition Bureau, because if labels are off, that's also under their purview. There's an act for labeling consumer products as well. But hopefully, this can at least get this looked at. But the study did indicate that, yeah, these label claims are inflated. Now, what it didn't say is that labs were doing artificial things to inflate those. That was not the point of the study. And if anything, the other thing in analytic, we talk about a fit for purpose analysis, fit for purpose testing. So my purpose of testing was to see if the label claims were correct. And that's what I demonstrated that they were not. It wasn't to identify if the labs are doing something fishy. That wasn't part of the study. And I think what the problem is that if you only do one COA and a full harvest, and you understand that there's a variance of 30 to 40% in buds of different places in that, you can't then extrapolate that and use it on every bud, every package that you use. And of course, the worst one would be the 1 gram, because those premium buds are between 2 and 4 grams or so, maybe even a little higher, and you can't put a 2 gram bud in a 1 gram bag. So clearly that's not the case there. So that's sort of my intro soliloquy of this, and happy to move on, and I'm really interested to see what our other colleagues here have to say.
I think this is a great chance to talk to Thomas about some of the work that he's done with you in the past, and maybe, from his perspective, the need for looking at this from such a high level, as opposed to maybe focusing on, who the specific offenders are.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. So my name is Thomas Fraleigh. I'm the founder and president of Vivariant Laboratories. We're in Mississauga, just north of Pearson Airport. We are an ISO 17025 and Health Canada GMP accredited laboratory. We test cannabis products, pharmaceutical drugs, dietary supplements, natural health products, personal care products. Cannabis is the primary focus of our business. Started the company in 2017, so dating myself a little here. Rob and I have just started to collaborate, just to clarify. So it's not like we've done a great body of work yet, but I'm really excited that he's reached out and engaged. We've used Rob's lab a little bit for confirmation testing of our own work for some other non-cannabinoid tests in the past, and always felt pretty good about working with them. So we're really excited here. Interlaboratory comparison studies are a real cornerstone of any quality control industry. So whether it's environmental testing for mercury in soil or something like cannabis flower, doing these programs, which can be sometimes called proficiency tests or interlaboratory studies, where you send similar samples to different labs, are a really important way of generating data sets to help standardize testing. So we're very excited to be kind of like pushing forward on this topic, which is very important. Part of maintaining ISO 17025 accreditation is that for the tests which are listed on your scope of accreditation, so this is today, just using cannabis as an example, twice a year, we get real cannabis flower shipped to us from a proficiency testing provider. We use PT Canada. We, the labs, are blind to this. We test those, report back to the issuing, the PT provider, and they score us based on how, there's some statistical calculations that go into it, and you get scored. In order to maintain your ISO accreditation or that test on your scope of accreditation, you need to pass that proficiency testing. So these are just some of the strategies of interlaboratory comparison studies that are sort of undergoing today, and part of why they're so important. And yeah, we're excited to be collaborating with Supra and sort of tackling this issue, which seems to be having a bit of a watershed moment. I don't know if it's the algorithm just serving me what I click on more, or if actually people really are talking about this a lot over the past maybe month even. It's really kind of come to the forefront of the conversation. I think a few high potency SKUs have listed some markets, and it's really kind of triggered a consumer level view on it. So it's been very interesting to follow the dialogue and sort of participate in things from our end.
So Thomas, I want to come back to you, but I want to jump over to Daryl real quick and just give a chance for him to introduce himself as well, and kind of weigh in here on his thoughts on what Rob has released. So Daryl Patterson from A&L, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Daryl Patterson from A&L Labs. We've been around for about 40 years. We got Health Canada license for cannabis about 2016, 2015. So we've been kind of there from the start. As well. So we've seen a lot happen. And I sort of manage some of the operations in the cannabis lab. So when it comes to Rob's study, I haven't really had a chance to really dig through it. I mean, I looked at it. It's pretty much just numbers. So it's hard for me to really differentiate what products were what. But I think it's a great study. I give kudos to Rob for doing it. I think a lot of us kind of held back and going to the stores and actually purchasing products and testing them, but I think we inherently all do know from testing our clients and working with our clients and comparing lab tests with other clients have sent us, so we know some of the issues in the industry. So I'm interested to see how this goes, and as Thomas said, the importance of proficiency testing. We also we're involved with that. There's some issues with proficiency testing that can make a lab look good when they can still be having issues with their testing. So, we can speak about that a bit, but I think anything we do for quality is great. We're also part of the C45 Quality Association, which has a good lab steering committee with a bunch of good labs that we also talk about these issues. So it's here, C45, Cannabis Council of Canada. I know they have looked at this matter as well. So I don't think it's just an algorithm. I think this is a real issue, and it's been an issue in the States as well, who in some states are way ahead of us, right? And their issues. So I think if we can tackle it as an industry and get ahead of it before we lag on it for years, like in California, I think that'd be great.
Daryl, with the work with C45, can you speak at all? I think you have mentioned that there's been some engagement with Health Canada on that issue in terms of just trying to express the lab's perspective on, everything they talk to each other in regard to the accuracy of testing limits. Can you share at all kind of the tone? Do they understand this is going on? Is this new information to them?
So our association has been talking about this issue for the last couple of years. We've talked about doing a inter-laboratory round robin. So the labs are very aware of it, and the group is. We take it seriously, but doing a round robin and getting a bunch of labs to cooperate without having a governing body like PT Canada is difficult. So we haven't done that, but we acknowledge some of the issues with the PT program at PT Canada, where we need real samples to run through a process, kind of like Rob did by grabbing a sample off the shelf. Now, when it comes to the association itself, talk to the directors there. They have been engaging Health Canada. Health Canada is aware of the issue. I don't have the the in-depth knowledge of what the discussion has been, but I've been told that they're pressing it with Health Canada. Health Canada is engaging them with this topic and several others, on a monthly basis. So it's not the only avenue, but I mean, it is a good indication that Health Canada is listening to these issues.
Can I just jump in here? Sorry, if you don't mind. So I did reach out to one of the board members for C45, which is actually a really great industry organization. It's really great for the quality assurance portion of cannabis. It's like a bunch of QC nerds like us that sort of advocate for better practices in the industry. And I caught up by phone just a couple days ago with one of the sort of like board members or directors who's actually been in these meetings with Health Canada since 2021. And Daryl, actually, my impression from speaking to him was it's not as like Health Canada is not as engaged as maybe it seems. So his feedback was that this issue has been actively brought to their attention since October of 2021, and that they have yearly meetings with Health Canada because this is the only way the Health Canada will actually show face and talk to someone, right? Is a big industry organization representing hundreds of companies. And his feedback was very pessimistic and negative. He says that every single written follow-up they give saying these are the issues that were identified. They bring up other topics as well too, but this topic has been on the docket ever since October 2021. Every follow-up letter saying these issues we discussed, we look forward to addressing it more, no response. And even they said in the most recent meeting when they went to Ottawa to talk to Health Canada about this topic, Health Canada almost says like, this is, I'm paraphrasing someone else's words here, but essentially kind of said, we're not sure if this falls in our purview to manage. The phrase that was used by him was, Health Canada says that we license cannabis testing labs, we don't accredit them, we don't audit their methods. And to me, I think this really is frustrating because, besides seeing the government fail me on every other level in my personal life, just looking at Health Canada, really actually picking and choosing which areas of lab testing they decide that they want to play a role managing. Because, for example, when it comes to testing hemp, industrial hemp for THC content, very explicit sample preparation guidance is given in the industrial hemp technical manual on how to conduct that lab testing to make sure that industrial hemp doesn't have more than 3% THC. That's Health Canada coming in and regulating and giving guidance to the lab testing industry. I don't know why they can't provide this to cannabis flower for the recreational market, and they just seem uninterested in even, lifting up the carpet to look at this issue. Another thing I'll point out as well too is that when it comes to pesticides, they're very clear, not very clear, but there are some guidelines given. You need to test for these targets to these LOQs. Your test report needs to say this. There's at least some guidance there. So I think Health Canada is really playing, and sorry, it's frustrating for me, right? They're really playing like, we regulate when it's easy, but when things are tricky, I don't know, we're just gonna think about it for 10 years, right? So my view and feedback that I've received is a little bit more pessimistic from C45, so I'm just sharing what I've heard from there.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all there, Thomas. I know it's pessimistic.
I think that's a great segue too. I wanted to ask Rob, what he has heard from Health Canada when he spoke to them on this, and also I think it's an opportunity to explain, Health Canada's tends to repeat that line that it's not their job to oversee the labs and the lab processes, and yet they do have a responsibility to be testing the product from the producers. And Rob, when you and I spoke, you brought up something really interesting that you thought that, as opposed to only testing the retention samples at producers when they're inspecting sites, that you'd like to see not only Health Canada, but maybe the provincial distributors doing the same kinds of testing that you've done, where you're going and buying the product that's on the shelves, which is going to be much more representative than that lab sample. So can you expand on that a bit?
But before that, I just wanted to sort of respond to what Thomas and Daryl said there. Honestly, I think the focus on the labs is a distraction in this case, because I would even argue, let's say I believe that my lab and the 3 labs represented here do a proper job. If we were sent those top buds that are maybe destemmed or something, we would be providing almost exactly those same COAs that would be at the high level. And it's inappropriate to use that on products that have different size buds. It just isn't. So the argument around Health Canada, it's been almost a deflection away from the real problem. The bottom line is, if you sell a product and you say it's 30% THC and there's 15% THC in there, that actually is approaching a fraudulent act. The only way it's not fraud is you can argue that you don't know what's in it. Should you really be allowed to sell packaged products that you don't know what the content is? That's another piece of it. So I've been beating on a couple points here. And what I've done by testing in the shelf and then using their formal complaint system, these must be addressed. And if they don't, there's going to be consequences on that. There's follow-ups, there's ways to follow up with that. But it's not about lab testing. It's about, the label is this, what's in it is this. And they can do that test as well. I sent the same lot numbers to another lab where I bought it off the shelf, packaged it up, unopened to them. I said it, so I'm very confident in this data. But it's a different issue. If we don't say, oh, there's a lab issue, even my lab, if I was testing those and I was getting biased materials, I'd have to test what they send me. And my COA is on what they send me. And why should that be applied to those 1 gram packages? It's not fit for purpose. And even Amazon has recognized that when they're selling product, they have some responsibility. So they require, for dietary supplements and for natural health products, that the manufacturers use a third-party ISO 17025 accredited lab. And for these other products, we're very comfortable that that's going to be reproducible, that testing thing. Cannabis isn't some magic material that is impossible to test. So they require that. When a BC store or Ontario store and Alberta store, when they're acting as the wholesalers, shouldn't they have the same level of accountability that Amazon feels they should have? Why would, if Amazon started selling cannabis, that would be a higher quality product than it is currently? And that is a mistake. And I guess the feed up for that, Thomas posted a nice thing on I think LinkedIn or about Australians who, when they tested products out of Canada, they came in with labels at 28%. Those were changed. And part of the dialogue there was that in Australia, we don't trust the lab results from Canada. It's the Australian GMP that we test. This undermines all our products. It's not just cannabis. It's natural health products, it's pharmaceutical products. We cannot let that fallacy stand.
Thomas, it sounded like you had something to add there.
I've always
in terms of the
yeah, I think I didn't mean to come out of the gate and say, oh, Health Canada needs to only audit the laboratories, etc. When I look at this issue, I see it's a complex issue, and I see there's multiple factors playing in. Do I believe that the fact that both at the wholesale B2B level and at the consumer purchase level, the fact that buyers only have often THC values to go off of as pushing systemic feedback through the system to bias results as an issue? Yes. I do believe there's bad actors from the LP side. I personally do know there are bad actors from the lab side as well too. It's not everyone. There are some though that are bad actors. And so I think I don't want the community to see 3 labs sitting around and us saying that we don't think there's any issues with lab, because there are some bad players out there for sure. I do know that there are a lot of good labs, and it's not necessarily that we can't do the work. I think that it's complicated, right? Because you can't 100% place the blame with one party versus another. It's a systemic issue that could come from both, and it needs to be tackled with a multifaceted approach to kind of reeling this in. So I think there's bad actors across the supply chain, but yeah, that's just my own business experience of having done this.
So Rob, you've touched on it a little bit. I think Thomas has as well, but can you speak directly to, there has been a lot of chatter, I'm sure you've seen online, people sort of criticizing you for not publicly naming and shaming those companies. Can you talk about why you chose that approach and why you think it's more important to maybe look at this from a more industry-wide trend?
Well, by using the existing complaint system, I have triggered a mechanism for them to deal with it. And quite frankly, it's not my responsibility to initiate recalls or to deal with things like that. It's Health Canada and the provincial store's responsibility for that. It's just not my style. I'm not going to shame and blame people. I don't do that. However, like if somebody else really wants to do this, they can pay me to test things, and then they own the data and they can reveal it to whoever they want, right? And I've even agreed, and I think probably Thomas and maybe Daryl will be behind this as well. For this in-store lab thing, I'm willing to do that work for $40 a sample plus to toss the material. So like that's very inexpensive. So if they want to go down that road, there's a way to do it. But really, from my perspective, I want to help processors get this right. I want to make sure that Canadian cannabis is considered the highest quality cannabis that's being sold anywhere. It's just not my game. But here's another question: if there was Tylenol on the shelf that had 50% of the content, how long do you think that would be allowed to stand? How quickly would that problem be addressed? Would the response of that be, oh, the labs don't know how to test Tylenol? Of course it wouldn't be. The thing would be, that's a product, that's mislabeled, that needs to be dealt with. It will be dealt with immediately. Cannabis is a product that is used by people with prescriptions who are under treatment. 10% of the rec market are people with prescriptions who prefer to buy from the rec market than from LPs directly. So this is as serious as an over-the-counter medicine. So why are we permitting this to stand?
Rob,
Daryl, yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I had a question, and this kind of leads into it. We're talking about, having them be accountable for what's on the package. And right now, the regulation is you test and you label exactly what's on that COA. If it says 20.2%, that's what you label, right, for total THC. You don't put a range in. You don't, because we all know cannabis has a range. We're not allowed to do that. So what is the percent allowance, like percent difference that they're allowed to have in dried flower? Because we're talking about dried flower to be away from. We know on formulated products, it's 15% usually, right? Sometimes 20. What is dried flower? What is the percent allowance off the COA label claim that they're allowed to have by regulation?
Yeah, and let me just throw a cone in there because I've looked at this with my study. They haven't listed it anywhere. Even the guides that they send to the producers, they don't mention it anywhere. However, in the cannabis regulations for shelf life testing, they indicate that if it's below 80% of the label claim, it is expired. So any of my products any of the products that I tested that are less than 20% are expired. You can say that they don't have to have a range, but they shouldn't be sold. They're expired then. So that's the closest they do it. But in Australia, it's 20%, and in Europe is 10%. We need to be.
Yeah. Health Canada hasn't stated exactly what it is. And I think that's the problem is you're right. It says 20% if you look at stability. If you look at other countries, fine. But when you try and nail it down, the regulations don't state what it has to be. So that's why, and one thing, 20% would be tough to hit on a 1 gram marker because we've done studies with LPs in the past, looking at one plant, taking 90 buds off one plant, taking 90 buds off another plant, and seeing a 6 to 8% variance of buds in that plant. So if you're selling 1 gram, how you have to have a very, very consistent plant to meet that, or you have to grade out your buds, make sure they're consistent, which some people do, blend the rest into a pre-roll or something, right? So, which I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying that it would be nice if Health Canada stayed in the regulation. Here's the allowance you're allowed to have off this dried flower package claim, because then you could do a recall on it. I had a client on a vape oil, formulated vape oil. The trace CBD in there was a THC vape oil, but the trace CBD was at our LOQ. It was, and Health Canada tested it. It was below their LOQ on the CBDA content. So they said that their label claim was twice of what so it was 50% higher, not 15. So they recalled that for a trace CBD level. That it was insignificant, right? But the regulations were there to state that, and it was unfair to the producer. It got recalled, but I mean, like you say, we're having like a 50% difference in this study, which constitutes to almost a 10% actual THC difference in a flower, and there's no real regulation to say they can't do that.
So can I just throw in a point here, Daryl, because that's a very interesting point. Take a look at the data set that I generated and look at the 1 gram packages. they're within 1 or 2% of those, and that has my variance and testing variance, and it has packaging variance. If they simply package the material and then test it 2 or 3 things to see what the levels are, they would know an average value and they would know a standard deviation, and they can put an accurate label claim on it. It's ridiculous to do it off the bud, because the other thing that's happening, that I believe anyway, another hypothesis, is as you go through packaging and having off the handling, the tumbling and stuff knocks off a few trichomes, and so it's always going to be a little less. But if you wait till it's in the package and don't put the label on yet, test 3 or 4, like it's only $80 a test, right? This is when you're talking about 500 packages or 2,000 packages, the cost of getting it right compared to the cost of having to recall that is trivial. But as you say, Health Canada hasn't landed on what the variance is, but clearly 40% is wrong. You know what I mean?
So to that one, with testing the 1 bud packages, the 1 grams, as a lab, and this is where, you know, I wonder too, like if we were to test that final package, do we take 1 bud and test that package and give a result, or do we combine, say, 10 of those packages of 1 buds and give an average for that? Like, what's your philosophy there? Because I think that's another thing that's unknown in the industry, how to test.
So our approach is the same way when we receive packages from clients. We take the whole content, we homogenize it. We use 0.2 grams to do our test. Now for the 1 gram, we wouldn't be able to do moisture because our method currently is 1 gram. We could probably do that with 0.5 gram, but we haven't validated that. So, but if you test the whole package, and quite frankly, the data set, if you look at it, I have 4 different, with the same lot number, 4 different batches of 5 samples. That's a pretty good statistical thing, and they're all pretty close within each other. But that's also involves their packaging, how accurate their packaging is, right?
Yeah.
So the 2 of them were much tighter, but they probably have much better packaging control. So anyway, I think if they put it in a package, measure the package, just like they do for other products, right? I mean, there's natural health products here that are dried herbs, and they seem to be able to get it right, but they don't test in the field. They test in what's in the package. That's what they said to the QA/QC department.
Yeah, and I think it's a matter of, to some degree, Health Canada is overwhelmed. There's some, 900 licensed producers. To be fair, not all of them are active, but of those that are active, there's a lot of products to oversee. That's not an excuse, but I think it probably helps explain why they're so behind the curve on this. I wanted to go back to one point you brought up, Rob, about sending in testing, and give both of our other guests a chance to chime in there too. A better understanding from a consumer level, if consumers are curious and they want to pick up something and test it against what the label says, what's that process like if they reach out to any of you, starting with Thomas?
Sorry, one more time. I was.
What's the process like for like a general consumer who wants to buy something off the shelf? Can they send that into you for testing?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually literally written into the cannabis regulations, which I will give Health Canada some credit for, that says that an individual, unlicensed or anything, can submit up to 30 grams of dried flower in one submission to an analytical testing lab, or whatever equivalent that would be in other formats, which is all a calculation based on dry flower equivalent. So literally 0 issues with us receiving samples from individuals. We get samples from, avid home growers, DIY medical patients doing their own oils and stuff like that. There's no problems with an individual submitting a sample to a laboratory. I can only speak for myself, but I imagine the process is similar with the other 2 labs here, where you just contact us, get a copy of our chain of custody form, typically, and then put it in the mail, or depending on the lab, sometimes like we will take an in-person drop off as well too, no problem. You just have to listen to me talk to you when you come by. I do just want to make one small point, just because I am a numbers nerd, and I think it's important to clarify this from a language perspective as we're looking into when we talk about differences in terms of percents, I think sometimes we run the risk of when we're talking about a unit of measurement that's in weight percent, like 20% THC, and we're saying a difference, like Daryl had mentioned, of 6 to 8% in the values that he was seeing, whether or not we're talking about a percentage change of the value or a delta of 6 to 8% in the actual number that's being read. It seems like a small detail, but again, I'm a nerd for these sort of things. I think it's very important to clarify that when we're having these discussions, because it's a big difference.
Daryl, can you speak a little bit about the process if someone wants to send it to you? I'm sure it's quite the same as Thomas described, but.
Absolutely, same as Thomas described. You drop it off, you can send it in chain of custody or website. We're happy to receive. We do tons of testing for individual users. So yeah, you're more than welcome to. And I mean, the topic here is about packages on the shelf. And I hate to feel that's up to the consumer to now double check their own products. And that's what Rob was getting to. If it was Amazon, they would take the ownership. And it's true. These home users or recreation use shouldn't be, even medical use shouldn't be responsible for this. So but we're happy to do it. And we have lots of people, home growers, of course, but yep.
So let me just follow up on that. So for our lab, if you want us to test on shelf, we would have to buy the product on shelf, or you would have to send us an unopened package. We're happy to test just any material you send us, but we cannot, like our fit for purpose test couldn't say that wasn't biased. If you want us to comment on something that's on the shelf, we either have to buy it or you have to send it to us unopened, for one. But yeah, I think maybe some of these C45 or some of these other organizations, maybe they should put some money behind doing some of this testing to help us make the argument. And here's the other ironic thing. So Health Canada does occasionally put out calls for testing for things like tobacco. There's one out there recently. The requirements are the lab must be ISO 17025 accredited, and they must have the test method that we're looking for under their scope, right? So that seems like a reasonable thing to and look, even if there's labs out there that don't have this, and maybe they're nervous because of it is an onerous thing to get, I'm happy to help. I'll send our quality anything I can do to help them. I'll do that. I'd rather have more good players in this than the few bad apples that are basically painting all of us in the same light, which we're not.
So that's a good segue then to talk about the bad apples. I know that, Rob, you've really emphasized that your work is not about blaming the labs. It's showing, frankly, the problem with the way the regulations are written and how testing is done, in terms of showing a pristine example versus what's on the label. But can you talk a little bit about those bad actors? I'd like to give all three of the guests now a chance to, from a consumer standpoint, what are some of the ways that a bad actor could put their thumb on the scale, so to speak?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a story from Lyft. So this is secondhand information. So another person I know in the lab business, over a few drinks, went up to some of these pros. So what's happening is the cultivators can't sell. So they're sending their product to processors. And so processors end up with a whole bunch of cultivators that they're packaging for. They're requiring those people to use a specific lab. So I've had people who want to use my lab that are cultivators, they trust me, but the processor makes them go to a specific lab. This gives them undue influence over who they choose. So one of my colleagues went up after a drink or two to say, okay, tell me what we got to do for us to be the lab that you recommend. And the answer was, you need to guarantee that the COA will be above a certain level. And look, is this any evidence that this is happening? But I think it might be happening. And
I can just back up and say I hear these things all the time. So you're not crazy. These are things I've heard as well too. So
yeah, and people have asked me, well, can you name the labs? Can you? And that's not my job. However, I tested 46 samples. 93% were below, were 15% and below. 87 were below 20% below. Who's got all the market share for the lab testing for those dried flower? There's only one or two labs. We know who they are. They need to own some of this stuff too. They should be kind of responsible for this too if they're associated. But as I said, The other way of weighting the scale is the producers can either send stuff that maybe the top buds have been destemmed. Yeah, they're going to have a higher thing. Maybe they sprinkle a little keef on it. And maybe the deal with the lab is they just keep their mouth shut about that. You know, our rule is that when we receive it, we have to homogenize everything in the package, whether it's stem or not, and we provide our results from what you sent us. We also tend to measure the moisture so that we will tell them, okay, this is what it was as we received. This is what it is at a dry basis, because that moisture is a variable. So if I was doing any other kind of environmental testing on plant material or soil testing, I would do it on dry weight because I want to get to the constant thing. So if their material comes in at 5%, that's going to boost their THC. There's lots of things they can do, and there's nothing that I can do about it as a testing lab. I have to give them what they receive, right? That's what my COA is valid for, only what I receive. So yes, is there a way to skew that? Maybe there's some people on the lab side that are rounding things up a little generously. But the tests that I did on those 228-gram things, the top buds in there were very close to the thing. That kind of implies that, you know, with packaging losing a couple trichomes, yeah, that could be reasonable. That could have been a valid test. But you know, but it's not. Yeah, is there bad labs? Absolutely. Do we need? I think everybody should have to participate in a Health Canada run proficiency testing round in order to get their license. So it shouldn't just be whether or not I have a security system here, so nobody steals the buds I'm testing. And they've even lowered the limit that what they have for the education level for the head of lab. But they never ask, can you do the test? And potency is pretty straightforward. But the pesticide testing, some of the residual solvent, it's pretty challenging given what we're required to do. So it's difficult to discuss this without getting a little heated about it, because I really believe what Canada has done for legalizing cannabis has been great. We're leading the world, and we can't have our quality of our product be tested when we can make excellent product. And it's just stupid money about the THC level.
On that note, is there a reason why you only tested for THC for this?
I didn't only test for THC. I only reported public. So we did full potency. So we did THC, like the acid neutral. We did the CBDs, and we also did CBN. That could give you an indication of shelf life. For some of the ones that had terpenes on the label, we also tested terpenes. For some of them that mentioned unique cannabinoids, you know, we see those when we run. We don't change our method. You know, we'll see if they're there, because we kind of took a look for that. But I've only presented the main data because just I wanted to focus on this is what the issue is. So there's nobody's talking about CBD elevation or that. And honestly, but it's probably similar to CBD because it's the same thing. The cannabinoids are in the top buds. And if that's the ones they're sending, the small packages don't have it.
CBD elevation has been an issue in the hemp industry. I can attest to that. But, Rob, on what you said about again, you know, talking about, you know, thumb on the scale and these things, like I personally have had experience contacting other labs, you know, for other clients who tested with us, tested with our lab, and asked what the difference was and why. And you know, one of the issues was drying. So you talked about percentage. So the cannabis comes in generally around 10% moisture. It depends how you measure moisture. And that's a dilution factor on your THC content. So if you send it in at 20% moisture, just as people don't know, it'll be less dilute in the THC. You'll have a lower THC number. So some people would over dry their cannabis before they send it to lab for chance to get a slightly elevated value. 5% is not going to make a huge difference. It might make a percent actual THC difference, not like a percent difference. But if you get up to, you know, say around 30% THC, and you have a lot of volatiles in there, and you're using a moisture method that overestimates moisture, which a lot of us do, and you then you use that to calculate to dry. And this is what's happening is some of the labs will actually report on the COA a dry, so they don't dry it down themselves. It's sent in at 10-15% moisture, and then the lab will calculate it down to dry. And I did have a lab doing that. They admitted to it. They gave their it gave their client a 4% actual THC boost. They went from a 24% THC to 28. And when I explained that to them, they understood. I think the lab at that time didn't understand the regulation. You're not allowed to do that and label it that. I mean, you can provide those calculations, provided you put it on the COA and the client's aware of it. And we do that for harvest and for people doing R&D. We absolutely do, but we put the as-is value, we put the calculation and the moisture value there. So that is one way you could overestimate 3 or 4% THC. The other one I've been told by labs is, again, labs telling me because they didn't have a good way to homogenize, and clients telling me they knew the lab was doing it, and also clients asking me to start testing their cannabis this way, because we, like you, Rob, like to homogenize a large amount. What they do is they test one bud. The lab receives 50 grams that has been scrupulously sampled by the LP as they're audited by Health Canada, but they know we're not audited. So when we get it, the lab would say, look for a nice bud. They're doing a visual inspection for foreign matter anyways. They look for nice trichomes. They send that one right over to the HPLC. They extract that one flower. And I know that happens with some labs. And it often, when you have a variance in a batch, say a common variance is actual THC. So say if a lot on average is a 22, you probably have some 24s, 25s in there. And you probably have some 20s in there, maybe 19s. So if you pick the 24s, 25s, there's a 3% boost. You then report to dry, there's another 3%. So those are ways inadvertently that labs can, without actually putting a thumb on the scale, just alter their method and calculate differently. And I've come across both encounters admitted by labs because either they didn't know the difference or they did know and the clients were asking them to. So I can say that's happened for sure, firsthand experience.
So in that, Daryl, if we tested in the finished pack, if what they're being held accountable is that the concentration in the finished package of the label, if they have to be within, and let's just make it 20%. I mean, for good's sake, right? That's still a very generous thing. So if we test that, and then they have to change their practice here. This stuff that you just mentioned just doesn't work. And the other ironic, when I'm testing these samples and they're coming in low, I had this old hippie dude come in who had just sampled from this plant, and we ran that at the same time, and it was 29.5% with 12% water. I'm going, man, and he was just, it just, there's guys that look like me that know what they're doing in these growth things. Right?
That's good. I can't get over 15%.
That's a good segue. Actually, I want to ask all three of you your perspective on these really high THC numbers. I often hear from lab folks that much over 28 is a little skeptical. Rob, you talked about seeing 29. What do you think consumers? I'll just go down the line, starting with Thomas. What do you think consumers need to be aware of when they're starting to see things up in 30, 35, 40% range?
Well, I think this week we saw, I'm not sure if it's the first, but there was a 39% SKU that hit the OCS last week, and there was a 40% SKU that hit the OCS this week. I can tell you that the 39% one was submitted to me by a journalist for confirmation testing, who will probably be posting that result pretty soon. So I will, and again, this is where it's hard, right? Because my job is to measure things. It's not necessarily like, I'm not an academic, right? I'm not someone who says, oh, the biological upper ceiling of cannabis flower is, I'm not a plant biologist, right? I'm a quality control scientist. I will say, I'll point out a few things. Health Canada, and I've seen copies of these, Health Canada has begun to issue warning letters to companies that list SKUs above 35%. I've seen actual copies of this letter. It was more Health Canada saying, just as a reminder, you cannot list an infused flower as a regular dry flower, just in case that's what you were doing here. So already we're starting to see some kind of like commentary around like maybe 35% almost being like an upper limit. Another thing to remember too is that when we talk about THC percentage in dry flower and we say 35% THC, because most of the cannabinoid is in the THC acid form, but the THC value that gets reported has a like an 87% correction factor on it. The actual percentage of cannabinoid in the original sample is even higher than that. Right, so we're getting even to more unbelievable kind of levels here. So, I don't think I need to be a plant biologist to say that I don't think 40% is real. I think that we're now getting into make-believe territory there. Maybe once every now and then, but I do think that you do need to be skeptical, but I think another thing Rob's data showed is that it's not always the high potency SKUs that are biased, right? I think a lot of, and data from other things have shown even middle of the road cannabis has been biased to be a bit higher, or it's just not matching up to what is on the label as well too, which kind of sucks even more for the consumer because now you really don't know what to believe anymore, right? So yeah, it's just difficult too because it's a novel industry. I do see it as a real tragedy on the loss of data integrity here. And you know, consumers are going to be looking to like, oh, I consumed this product which had X% of this cannabinoid and felt this. They're looking for patterns and things they like, but all of a sudden now, if those numbers aren't as valid as they're supposed to be, it makes them more complicated for them. So I wish I had magic advice for the consumer. I would just say that we're seeing things get a little bit crazy these days and they're getting pretty high. So I think everything just needs to be taken with a grain of salt. So I wish I had better advice.
Rob, same question. What should consumers keep in mind from your perspective? What's a realistic THC ceiling on flower?
Well, look, I'm an analytical chemist. That's my job. If they say it's 40%, that doesn't mean anything to me. If I test it, if it's 40%, then I'm happy to say 40% is possible. But it has to, so I'm only talking about testing, right? Do I think that a 40% is realistic? No, I think it's batshit crazy. I think more 30%, but I have seen products like not only this one for the just mentioned, there's another grower around here called Tom Small, who we actually we prepared the material for some of these proficiency testing. So I said, well, I need some high THC, highest quality product, because it really had good terpenes in it as well. But so there is people that are able to do that, but it's not just the genetics, it takes very specific growing techniques. They have to almost try to kill the product in the last week or two, because it's a response to that. So, but I think, yeah, the testing things, maybe what we need is like a BQA or, you know, I had toyed around with the idea of a super verified type of co-label where it's been tested in the finished product by an ISO accredited lab. You can put this label on it, and then the consumers might be more trustworthy of that. And if, you know, so that's another thing that could happen. But I think, look, there is good labs out there. There is bad labs out there. But if we get the good labs to work together and hold people to the fire to make and get rid of this problem, because our credibility internationally is being tainted with this.
So Daryl, same question for you in terms of, you know, consumer standpoint. From what you've seen, you've worked in this space for quite a while. What do you think is a realistic ceiling of THC for cannabis flower?
Yeah, I think around that 30% is really realistic for what I see. We've seen some stuff close to 31 come in. One thing, you know, as Thomas hinted on, was these infused products. So we are pretty blind to a lot of samples that come in. So I do have stuff comes in once in a while and it'll hit 35. And I have a selection. Take infused cannabis so you can designate your product properly. But, you know, our clients don't always do that. So every once in a while I scour our database and I see some high numbers, but for the most part, I know when they're an infused product. Any of those best growers we work with, and I see their product consistently come in around 29 to 31 on certain products, and I believe it. And those are real numbers. I don't think they're not over dried. Our deviation and method is very tight as well. So I'm confident in the testing. So I think those are real numbers. That's total THC that consumers should look for. There could be products out there that people are reinfusing, like adding the keef back in. And I think that's possibly what's going on. I had one client that, you know, they worked with us for a while, and before this THC stuff really took off, they never hit 30%, but they have SKUs over the OCS now at 37, 38. So, and that wasn't that long ago. So when you look at that, that's why either someone's doctoring the samples or the labs are doing something strange. And either way, it's an industry problem. And consumers should be, you know, they're getting charged more for this product, whether it's a 25% that's really 15 or it's a 35 that's really 25% THC. And, you know, it's also could be safety as well. I mean, they say, I've been smoking this 37% stuff all week long, and then somebody gives them a real, you know, 30%, and all of a sudden they're knocked out, right? So you could look at it that way as well.
If I could add in, sorry, David, just maybe 2 more points, just things for the consumers to keep in mind is that I think it was April of last year, 2022, just using the OCS, Ontario Cannabis Store issued a, as a government agency, they issue tenders when it comes to retaining services for contractors and stuff like that. So they actually issued a tender to retain a testing laboratory as like a confirmation testing partner. And to me, as a consumer, I think we've reached the point now where labs and industry, we've tried to engage with the regulator sales, and we're not making much progress. Where I really think we can have a bit of a groundswell is with more consumer engagement, because particularly the consumers pay the salaries of the people that work at the OCS, right? I would be very interested to see more consumers start to demand transparency into some of the retesting. I know through the laboratory gossip that samples have been sent to the person, the lab that won that tender. It wasn't anyone on this call here. And so even if that data is anonymized, like, why was a sample sent for confirmation testing? Was it random? Were the results suspect? What was the results that came back? And then what were the actions that were taken from that? This is all taxpayer money in the OCS, right? So I think more consumers, in fact, any consumers listening to this now, if you could take a couple minutes out of your day to reach out to the OCS right now and request some more transparency into things like that, it's all part of the multifaceted approach to bring more transparency to this segment of the sector. And we do actually need consumer engagement at this point, because industry on its own, we aren't able to affect the change. And there's literally industry organizations trying to lobby for this. So that's just a little bit more that I would say as well too. And like, you can also send the feedback to Health Canada. I think that one's a bit more specific case with the OCS, but overall engagement from consumers as well too, I think is going to be really critical in kind of getting traction on this issue going forward.
Thomas, do you think consumers, in light of what you've seen, what we're talking about, and what Rob has released, do you think consumers can look at testing results as having any integrity?
Like testing results, like any testing result, or
no,
THC,
within the cannabis space? Yeah.
I mean, I feel like with edibles and processed products, customers do tend to play a little bit more safe. I know at least the QAs that I work with, so I think when it comes to potency results, and this is just my impression so far, this is a personal view, not something I have data. I know Rob's mentioned being interested in looking at edibles and stuff like that as well too. At least from the clients I work with, people tend to be quite focused on making sure they meet those plus minus acceptance criteria when it comes to edibles, when it comes to concentrates as well too. I do think consumers in general should be wary about the THC values that are on flower. That's just a reality right now, especially when we have international companies saying Canadian labs can't be trusted. Like, I think they should question what's on there, right? And I don't think it's fair to consumers that Health Canada, treats them like they're somehow second-rate consumers that don't deserve the same accuracy as like an NHP product, as Rob brought up, right? I think overall, the consumers are merited to have some skepticism when it comes to looking at potency values on dried cannabis flower for inhalation or whatever else you use it for, dried cannabis flower in the shop.
Rob, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I want to follow up on that a little bit. There's an interesting irony here. So let's say Health Canada did say, hey, I like your proposal. We'll pay you a few $1,000s to do the exact study I just did. I wouldn't be permitted to release those results. When I test products for a client, we have a confidentiality agreement. They own the data. I can't, unless they ask me to, I can't discuss that. So those labs that were commissioned in the OCS to test product, that information hasn't been released publicly, and they don't have any ability to release that publicly. So I think the best way is to have some consumer groups maybe fund some of this and have them release this and also put more pressure on. I also think the provincial distributors should be accountable if there's products in their stores that are off. And they should be accountable to the consumers. They're the ones that are making money. So they should be required to do some testing. Or if they don't do that and products are found in their system to not meet labels, there should be consequences, be it fines or whatever. But there would be if it was a natural health product food store. So why shouldn't there be for cannabis that, again, people are using as medicine under prescription from a physician? That is a different thing. We have to be more careful with this. And then to get into public safety as well, when we went into Lyft last year, I sent recently, I sent an email to all our former clients, and one guy came back. Not only won't we ever support you, we've been actively undermining you guys because we did your quality. We tried to have you address some quality issues and you wouldn't. So I went back to the data. Yeah, we had run a test for this guy. He had a positive pesticide test. We confirmed it by running it 3 or 4 times. He sent it to other labs until he got a negative result. And then not only was able to use that negative result to get his product listed, but then wanted us to explain to Health Canada why we had an inappropriate test result. So, you know, I don't think there's a huge problem with pesticides things here, but there needs to be the regulatory oversight to make sure these things don't happen.
Daryl, it looks like you had some thoughts on that.
No, I've just had similar experiences to Rob. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you guys are saying. The OCS, the tender with them, I mean, even if they just release the results, it's great. I think the lab they selected is one that's a fair player. So, you know, should be able to, I don't think they went after that tender for THC specifically. I think they were more looking for microbiology or pesticide contamination, random checks. That's my guess. Yeah, the pesticide thing, like Rob said, I don't think consumers need to worry about pesticides. Health Canada is pretty strict on them, almost too strict at some points where the regulations are met. I'd actually say that when we started, we were gauged by LPs on how good our pesticide method was, how low we could detect. And it's almost transitioned now where they've said, you know, can you maybe not detect so low? Because when you detect, even though Health Canada has a limit, they still have to report. So now they're asking actually labs to boost that up. So you have to revalidate and whatnot. So I mean, that's just more of a, if there's pesticides in there, there's such minor amounts that you're breathing more probably when you're walking out the door by a farmer's field, or it's definitely in your food. So there's no bad actors on that. When heavy metals are also tested very low. The really only 2 things in the market that aren't clear are the THC limits and the microbiology limits for consumers. So, you know, those are the only things that Health Canada needs to clarify. I really see, but.
Do you think there are producers who are sort of lab shopping for microbials in the same way that they're maybe lab shopping for THC?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
absolutely,
for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, different tests give different results, and there's different results. Health Canada doesn't regulate the type of method, and different types of techniques can get different results. And depending on what microbes you have, can give you different ones. Now, there's a question to say whether it's even a risk once you incinerate something, right? Like on a oral product you're consuming, like in your food for sure. But there is the argument to be made that when you're incinerating flour, all the microbials will kill. That's the you know, one of the arguments made to Health Canada. But
but to further that, the testing of the harvest, the testing of the metals and the testing of the pesticides, that's a fit for purpose test. If it's not there in the harvest, it's not likely going to show up in the packaging. That's not where it's coming from. So that's a fit for purpose test. Microbes a little bit tricky because it's a growing thing, right? So we don't even test microbes because I'm a mass spec jockey, right? So that's what we focus on. But yeah, so it's a fit for purpose. And the thing is, doing a COA for cannabinoids on a batch and then applying that to finished pack, it's just not fit for purpose. And that's part of the problem.
And I think that brings that back to your point at the beginning, that really this seems to be that Health Canada is not requiring the right type of testing mechanisms that represent what consumers are actually consuming.
Yeah, but they do have regulations out there. There's and they have for labeling and all that, what specifications, even though they haven't identified what it is in cannabis. I think we could argue that it's 20% because of that, just because of that other regulation. But yeah, they need to test products to make sure it's safe. And now that they know there's a problem, so I've called them out. I said, here's the list of compounds. This is how far out they are. I have other labs that are confirming this. I'm happy to send some to your Health Canada lab to confirm it. And there's another government lab that doesn't really want to get engaged in any negativity. So, but they're also testing this. And I even sent them packaged material, so that unopened packaged material, but you test it then, and just to confirm that we're doing. So the ironic thing is I have complete confidence in my ability to test and other labs' ability to test that are doing things properly. I think there's a number out there. So it's not that I don't have faith in that. It's that by putting a high THC level on a label, they're getting more sales and they're making more and they're making money. So, and they're just afraid to deal with that. That's not right.
So as we push up on the little bit past 1 hour, you know, I'll give each of you a chance to give your thoughts on sort of capping all of this off, starting with Rob. What do you think the next steps are now that you've released all of this?
Canada is a leading country for production of cannabis. We have to ensure that the quality of cannabis products in Canada is not questioned, that people rely on what we put on labels, that they rely on the safety standards and the regulatory framework. And so in the future, as we get to international importing, that we lead there as well. But part of that is if we put something on the label, we have to meet it. And if there's a problem, not looking at the problem doesn't solve it. Not looking at the problem makes it worse for everything else. We can solve this problem. We've done it for other products. Nobody worries about whether their aspirin has the level that it's in it, or even some of the natural health products. They trust those labels. They should also be allowed to trust the Canadian cannabis product labels.
Thomas, final thoughts?
Sure, it's a complex problem that requires a multifaceted solution. I mean, we need a multi-tiered approach to rein it in from different angles. I think that my sort of prophecy here and my vision is that I think we said this earlier on, I think we're just a few years behind some of these US markets that were able to come online at a state level with med or rec markets prior to 2018 and Canada only legalized. And I think we're trailing a few years behind them. What we've seen now more and more in these US markets is more and more legal action regarding this topic. And so, again, I just think that no matter where you sit in the supply chain here, be aware of maybe a growing liability exposure from this topic, no matter where you sit in the supply chain. I know we all are stressed out enough as it is working in this sector. I don't need to give anyone else nightmares, but it's just something to keep in mind. Absolutely, if you're a cultivator engaged in export, this should be something you're concerned about for sure, because I can tell you this material is going to get retested in destination countries and it's going to become a topic, so it's something you should be aware of. And I think we do need more consumer engagement, like I said before. Multiple industry organizations have been trying to work closely with the regulators, making very little progress. So I think we do need more consumer engagement on the topic to at least discuss and bring more light to this issue and hopefully begin to tighten things up a bit.
And Daryl, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I agree again with you guys saying we're all in this together. I think some clarity on the regulations from Health Canada would help. So if there was a better way to label product for THC, and then a regulation on what that to be, it would be great. Even illegal websites you can go to and they state numbers like this potency is going to range between this amount and this amount. I know they do that on the OCS as well. I don't see any 37s on those sites. So if we had some regulation around that, some follow-up testing to keep people accountable, and maybe some standardization for the labs. I don't think this is a lab problem, but if one lab thinks it's okay to test this way versus this way, and their only regulating body is the LP and not a regulating body, even if it's a volunteer one we're part of, like you guys talked about, like a VQA, CQA, we've had discussions about that, some type of brand on labeling, so we build consumer confidence. I've had clients even say, can we put test with confidence at A&L Labs? Absolutely, you can on our label. So, but I don't think it's an A&L Labs thing. I think we should have a group together, whether it's C45 or another group, and say, test it with confidence with these labs who participate in this round robin testing, and we hold each other accountable. And then, and then that takes that out of the equation. You know what I mean? That's, to me, I think those are some good solutions. We can't just hang this all on government. It has to do with everybody in the supply chain.
Okay, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. I know we could keep talking about this for several hours probably, but I think this is a good synopsis both for consumers as well as others in the industry. I think this is really important work. And, Daryl, you touched on this, but I know I've heard from several others behind the scenes, they've praised you for kind of having the guts to finally do this. This is something I know a lot of folks have been talking about in the background for years now. And I think it has probably really set off a bit of a firestorm that hopefully is going to lead to some regulatory changes. So thank you for that work.